Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started on an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet moments in the house where you could hear every creak of the floor and every hum of the air conditioning. I never imagined that a simple day like that would change the way I looked at someone I had known for years. Sometimes the most unexpected feelings appear when you least expect them, and once they surface, it's almost impossible to ignore them. That's exactly what happened when I found myself alone with my stepdad. There's something complicated about family dynamics, especially when emotions blur the lines of what should and shouldn't be. I knew the rules, the boundaries that society and even my own conscience set for me, but there was always this quiet connection between us, subtle, unspoken, and hidden beneath layers of everyday life. It wasn't something I ever planned, but the more time we spent together, the harder it became to deny that tension building beneath the surface. That afternoon, the house felt different. My mom was away, busy with her own commitments, and the silence between us filled every corner of the room. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, though. It was heavy, charged, and almost magnetic. Every glance seemed to linger longer than it should. Every word carried double meaning. I found myself questioning whether it was my imagination or if he felt it too. I still remember the way he looked at me that day, steady, searching, almost as if he was trying to figure out if I noticed the same spark he did. I tried to push the thought away, reminding myself of who he was in my life. But the more I tried to bury it, the stronger it became. We laughed about small things, shared stories, and before I knew it, the space between us felt smaller and smaller. My heart beat faster, not because of fear, but because of something I couldn't explain. It's strange how one simple touch, even the most innocent brush of a hand, can feel like crossing an invisible line. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. I knew I was standing at the edge of something that could change everything: my family, my sense of right and wrong, and even how I saw myself. Yet at that moment, the risk almost felt worth it. What makes people give in to temptation, even when they know the consequences? Is it loneliness, longing, or the human need to feel seen in ways that others overlook? I want to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection with someone you weren't supposed to? Would you step back, or would curiosity pull you forward? As the afternoon stretched on, every second seemed to pull us closer to something neither of us could undo. The world outside felt far away, and all that mattered was the unspoken truth hanging in the air between us. I didn't know how far it would go, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And just as the silence grew heavier, just as the moment sharpened into something undeniable, something unexpected happened that changed the entire direction of that day. The sound that broke the silence wasn't loud. It was just the faint knock of a tree branch against the window, but it snapped us both out of whatever moment we had been lost in. I pulled back quickly, pretending to fix my hair, while he cleared his throat and looked away as if nothing unusual had just happened. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. There was no denying it anymore. The quiet understanding between us had grown into something heavier, something impossible to ignore. To make sense of how we got there, I think you need to know a little more about him and about us. My stepdad wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention the moment he walked into a room. He was steady, calm, and always present in ways that most people overlooked. He had been part of my life for years, and in that time, he had become more than just the man married to my mom. He was the one who drove me to practices, who helped me study when things got tough, who listened without judgment when I needed to vent about the world. Those small gestures created a bond, one that felt natural and comforting at first, but as I grew older, it became more complicated. People often say love can take many forms, but what happens when affection blurs into something deeper, something forbidden? That question haunted me. I found myself replaying our conversations in my head, remembering the way his smile lingered, or how his eyes seemed to catch mine and hold them just a little too long. It wasn't something I could explain to anyone, and maybe that secrecy only made it stronger. That afternoon, as the minutes stretched into hours, we found ourselves sitting closer than usual on the couch. He started asking me about my life, about the things I wanted for the future. His voice was calm, but his eyes told another story. It was as if he was searching for something beneath my words, something I wasn't ready to say out loud. I could feel the tension in the room building, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering, was I the only one feeling this way? Or was he just as caught in this invisible pull as I was? The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. It made me restless, made my thoughts race, made me question every little detail. Was it wrong that I didn't want to run from it? Was it wrong that part of me wanted to see just how far the moment could go? Still, there was another part of me that held back. The part that knew how much this could hurt, how messy it could become if anyone ever found out. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one step forward would change everything forever. My heart kept telling me to take the risk, but my mind screamed at me to stop. That tug of war between desire and reason was exhausting, but it was real. The strangest thing is that nothing big happened that day. No grand gestures, no words that crossed the line outright. And yet, it felt like everything had already changed. The tension between us was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, alive in the air, in every look, in every pause. I often wonder, if you were in my place, would you have pulled away completely, or would you have stayed, curious to see where it could lead? What would you risk for something that felt so dangerously real? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know how you see it. As the sun began to set that evening, the shadows in the room grew longer, and with them, the unspoken questions hung heavier than ever. He stood up slowly, almost as if he was about to say something important, something that might change everything between us. My heart raced, waiting, unsure if I wanted to hear it or if I was terrified of what it might mean. And then, he opened his mouth, hesitated, and for a moment, I could see the same conflict in his eyes that I felt inside me. The words didn't come, but the silence said more than enough. The silence after he hesitated was almost louder than words could ever be. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken pressing between us, filling the room like a fog. Part of me wanted to beg him to finish what he had started to say, to confess if he felt the same confusion I did. But he simply looked at me for a long moment, then turned his gaze toward the window as though the answer he needed might be hiding out there in the fading light. That pause, that unfinished thought, became the beginning of the conflict I couldn't escape. From the outside, everything about our family looked normal. People would see us at dinners, gatherings, and holidays and think we were just another household with its ups and downs. But inside, I carried a secret that gnawed at me every time I caught his eyes across the table or felt his presence beside me. The more I tried to bury it, the stronger it grew. And that was the heart of the conflict, choosing between what was right in the eyes of the world and what felt undeniably real in the quiet spaces where no one was watching. There were moments I thought about my mom, about how much she trusted both of us. She often praised the way we got along, how he was always supportive, how I could talk to him about things that other kids might never share with a parent figure. She had no idea that under the surface, those talks, those moments of trust, were feeding something neither of us could admit out loud. That guilt tugged at me, but so did the longing. It was a battle that lived in my chest every day. One night, I overheard him on the phone, his voice low and serious. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to know he was under his own kind of stress, something at work, something about responsibility and choices he didn't want to make. It made me realize he wasn't untouchable, that he carried his own burdens. Seeing that vulnerability only pulled me closer, even though I knew it should have been a reason to step back. At the same time, I began noticing how differently he treated me compared to others. With friends or family, he was polite, distant in the way most adults are. But with me, it was different, softer, warmer, as if he understood things no one else did. That difference became its own subplot in my mind, proof that I wasn't imagining it. Or was I? Could it all just be me wanting something that wasn't really there? That uncertainty was just as powerful as the tension itself. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Was he holding back because he felt the same way but knew it was dangerous? Or was I reading too much into his hesitation, creating a story that only lived in my head? What would happen if one day he stopped holding back, if he let the words spill out that we were both too afraid to say? I want to ask you, if you saw two people in a situation like this, both struggling with something unspoken, would you tell them to walk away before it got messy, Or would you be curious to see how far it might go? Share your thoughts in the comments, because I know perspectives will be divided. That night, after everything was quiet and I was alone in my room, I replayed the scene again and again. The way he almost spoke, the way his eyes lingered, the way the room felt as though something invisible had passed between us. My heart wanted answers, but all I was left with was more questions. And as the days passed, those unanswered questions became the very thing that kept me awake at night. The line had already been crossed in silence, even if not in words. But how long could silence hold back the truth before it broke wide open? The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance, every small interaction carried more weight than it should have. I could sense the tension in the air whenever we were in the same room, like we were both aware of an invisible thread pulling us closer, but terrified of what would happen if we followed it. The strangest part was that we never spoke about it directly. It was as if the silence between us became its own kind of language, one only we understood. There was one evening when the atmosphere nearly cracked. The house was quiet again, my mom away visiting family, and it was just the two of us. I joined him in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really, I was just aware of how close we were sitting. The TV played in the background, but neither of us was paying attention. I could feel the tension building with every passing second, like the whole room was holding its breath. He asked me something simple, about how my day had gone, but his eyes didn't match his casual tone. They lingered, searching, almost pleading. My voice caught for a moment when I answered, and that silence after I spoke was so thick I could almost hear my heartbeat echoing. It felt like the world outside had disappeared, and all that existed was that moment. The conflict inside me became unbearable. Part of me wanted to move closer, to break the silence once and for all. Another part screamed at me to keep my distance, to remember the consequences that would ripple through everything if we crossed that last invisible line. I saw the same battle flicker across his face, hesitation, desire, restraint, and something else I couldn't quite name. Then, as if fate wanted to test us, the lights flickered from the storm outside. The shadows in the room danced across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. For a brief second, it felt like the storm inside me was reflected in the storm outside, building to a breaking point. The air was so charged that even the smallest movement, a shift in his posture, the brush of his hand against the couch, felt amplified. My chest tightened, and I wondered if this was the moment everything would finally change. I didn't know if I wanted to run from it or give in completely. And just when it seemed like the silence was about to shatter, when the pull between us reached its strongest point, something unexpected happened that stopped us both in our tracks. The story we had been silently writing together was about to tip over the edge, but the question was, would we take that final step, or would fate decide for us? The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling across the sky like a warning neither of us wanted to hear. The flickering lights finally steadied, but the energy in the room was anything but calm. I could feel it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his breath seemed heavier than before. It was like the universe was daring us to make a choice, pushing us closer to the edge. And then, right in that fragile moment, the unexpected happened, a knock at the door. It was sharp and sudden, cutting through the thick silence like glass shattering on the floor. My whole body jolted, and I saw him stiffen too. For a split second, panic crossed his face. Who could it be at this hour, in the middle of a storm? Neither of us moved at first, frozen by the interruption, almost guilty for being caught in a moment that hadn't even fully happened. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet house. He finally stood, running a hand through his hair as if to steady himself before walking to the door. I sat there, my heart still racing, my thoughts spiraling in 100 directions. When he opened the door, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. It was one of our neighbors, drenched from the rain, asking if our power was out too. The timing felt almost cruel, like fate was reminding us that the outside world still existed, that we weren't alone in whatever was unfolding between us. As they spoke, I realized how shaken I still felt. It wasn't just the storm or the sudden knock, but the awareness of how close we had come to crossing a boundary we could never step back from. The interruption had pulled us back to reality, but it hadn't erased the pull between us. If anything, it made it stronger, sharper, like an unfinished sentence hanging in the air. Later that night, after the neighbor left and the house grew quiet again, he didn't sit back down beside me. Instead, he kept his distance, pacing slightly as if searching for the right words. "We should be careful," he finally said, his voice low, almost hesitant. It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't denial either. And that careful choice of words only deepened the mystery. Careful of what? Of being seen? Of admitting too much? But the twist didn't end there. The next morning, as if the universe wanted to test us again, my mom called to say she would be away longer than planned. Work had come up, and she wouldn't be back for several more days. Hearing that made my stomach flip. On the surface, it was nothing unusual, but inside, I felt the stakes rise instantly. More days of being alone together, more chances for that tension to break wide open. It was almost unbearable, knowing that every ordinary moment could turn into something that would change everything. Breakfast at the table, passing each other in the hallway, watching TV at night, all of it carried the weight of what was unspoken. The conflict wasn't just about desire anymore, it was about time running out, about choices waiting to be made before my mom returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm outside had been a mirror of the storm inside us, and that now, with more time alone, the real climax was on its way. But how far would it go before one of us finally said the words we were both too afraid to speak? The days stretched on after my mom's call, and with each one, the silence between us grew heavier. It was no longer just unspoken tension, it was a question waiting for an answer. Every glance, every small brush of closeness, felt like standing on the edge of a choice neither of us could avoid. By the third evening, the weight of it all finally reached its breaking point. We were sitting in the kitchen, the storm long gone, but the memory of it still fresh in my mind. The air felt charged, like before lightning strikes. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking at me in a way that was both serious and conflicted. "We can't keep pretending nothing's happening," he finally said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it. For the first time, the truth was spoken out loud. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to run, to hide from the reality of his words, but another part felt relief, like a secret I'd been carrying alone had finally been shared. "I know," I admitted softly. "But what do we do with it?" That question hung in the air, and I could see the war in his eyes. We were both caught between desire and consequence, between what felt real and what we knew was dangerous. The climax of everything we'd been avoiding was here, and there was no turning back. He stepped closer, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had shrunk to just the two of us. The pull was undeniable, and I thought this was the moment when everything would finally break. But just as the silence reached its peak, just as I braced for the choice we might make, the unexpected twist came. His phone buzzed on the counter, and when he answered, the color drained from his face. It was my mom. She wasn't extending her trip anymore. She was on her way home, earlier than planned. The words hit like a wave of cold water. Everything we had been building toward, all the tension, the closeness, the unspoken choices, suddenly collided with the reality of time running out. He looked at me, eyes wide with urgency. "We can't let her know. We can't even let her suspect." His words weren't just about protecting her, they were about protecting us, about locking away the truth before it ever fully surfaced. And in that instant, I realized something even more shocking. It wasn't just my secret anymore. It was his too. We were bound by something we could never speak of, a truth that would remain hidden behind careful smiles and quiet moments. ChatGPT said, "When my mom walked through the door that night, everything looked normal on the surface. She smiled, hugged us both, and started talking about her trip like nothing had changed. But inside, I felt the weight of everything we had left unsaid pressing down on me. My stepdad and I exchanged a brief glance, and in that single look, we agreed without words that what had happened in those days alone would never be spoken of again. The choice wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Life slowly fell back into its usual rhythm, family dinners, casual conversations, and the daily routines that had once felt ordinary. Yet, beneath all of that normalcy, there was an unspoken bond that would never disappear. It wasn't love in the traditional sense, and it wasn't just attraction either. It was something more complicated, something born out of circumstance and silence. We never crossed the line again, but the memory of those days lingered, etched into the quiet spaces of my mind. The conflict between desire and responsibility became a lesson I carried with me. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we never get to make, the ones interrupted by fate before they can unfold. And maybe that was for the best. I often wondered what would have happened if the phone hadn't rung, if my mom hadn't come home early. Would we have gone too far? Or would we have found a way to stop ourselves at the very last second? Those questions never found answers, and maybe they weren't supposed to. Looking back, I realized the real story wasn't about a secret romance or temptation. It was about the choices that shape us, the boundaries we face when emotions get messy, and the strength it takes to hold back when every part of you wants to give in. It was about the gray areas of life, where right and wrong blur together, and we're forced to live with the echoes of what almost happened. I want to ask you, if you were in my place, would you have kept the silence, or would you have confessed everything no matter the cost? Your thoughts might surprise even yourself. Share them in the comments, because everyone sees a story like this differently. And so, life went on. The storm outside passed, the tension inside faded, but the memory of those days stayed with me like a hidden scar. Some secrets never leave, they just become part of who you are. Summary: this is the story of a young person caught in a complicated emotional bond with their stepdad when circumstances left them alone together. What started as innocent connection grew into powerful tension, testing boundaries, choices, and loyalty. Just as things reached their breaking point, fate intervened, leaving them bound not by action but by silence. It's a tale of temptation, restraint, and the unspoken truths that change us forever.